Old School NYC Gamer here once again at the Classic Gaming Expo 2014, and today I'm going to be showing all you guys and gals out there a very special panel featuring Jay Smith, the creator of not only one but two innovative things that came out for retro gaming back in the day. First off was the very first handheld, as you can see right here, with portable cartridges, and that is a Microvision. But for a lot of you who don't know, in 1981, Jay Smith also presented a little known thing to Kenner, but was shot down by that. So a few tweaks later in a bigger screen, and in 1982, you had the Vectrex. So without further ado, let's go head over to the panel. Let's check out what he has to say, and we'll take it from there. So let's check it out.
And want you to be careful. Arm tucked in my belt, so we're going to go in there. I want you to be very creative. Jay Smith says these are creative people. They don't work well under a 9-to-5 structure. I was worried about this being done. We're just lucky to get out of here alive. We make use of all the creativity we have here. So we've invited Johnny Mountain here today. He's going to help us with our product creation. What kind of product would it be? A doll. A doll. We could name it a Johnny Mountain doll. You may wonder how these guys get anything done. Don't ask the cats, but it seems to work. Western Technologies is one of the best designed firms of toys in the world. Project out in no time flat. Out of this play has come such hits as Microvision, the first cartridge programmable game system to use a liquid crystal display. The newest game to be spawned by Western Technologies is the Vectrex arcade system. Will it be a hit? You bet you're after one. With Jay's help, I decided to try my hand at the old joystick. You notice it's got on the screen a scene of a road. Now I'm going to be driving down that road. One of my insurance agents not watching. He is, he's on a corner area out there. And then the toughest part's when you get in the canyon. That's like no long drive. That's where I lost it.
So that was the atmosphere that we had at Western Technologies at the time. That was a lot of fun, and at the time we were concentrating on microphone. Hello, hello. Okay. So at the time we were concentrating on new game systems, and essentially it would boil down to the display. Games coming in as they're designed, but how are they displayed? And we had gone on from Microvision, as you saw there, to which was a 16 by 16 display, to a 32 by 32 display, to a color Microvision, which used birefringence, which is, if you're into LCDs at all, is the LCD works by having the liquid crystals turned by an electronic field, and the more they were turned, the different color it would be. Is that right? According to the polarization that we had.
Yeah, actually, so like in the gray area, there's in the gray area between black and white, which you could turn the LCD to gray also, anything between that. And if you put this quarter wave plate, they called it, with some other things in there, in the usual LCD sandwich of polarizers, then the different grays would become different colors.
Worked out real well, and by the way, then we should introduce ourselves. I'm Jay Smith. This, in a rare public appearance, is Jerry Carr. So I'm going to tell you a little odd items in the process of creating the Vectrex. And Jerry's going to tell you something that has never been told before about Vectrex.
We're
So,
going to get a color one?
do a color one. The color one's right over there.
Okay.
So Rick has brought a prototype. What we have up here that Jerry was looking at, his own handiwork there, is a prototype, a handmade plastic case by Walter Nakano, our model maker. And at the far end is the color Vectrex. And to jump ahead, the color Vectrex, we could never even come close to affording a color tube. So the color Vectrex had 2 layers of phosphor on it, regular CRT, like we had in the basic model, but had 2 layers of phosphor. And as you put the electronic beam on, what I remember reading is that at 25,000 volts, it would go all the way through to the second layer and make a color, red, I think. And at 18,000 volts, it would make green, and in between, it would make yet a different color. And it actually worked pretty well, except the problem was going from 18,000 to 25,000 volts wasn't quick enough, and so if you want to draw a red line, it would start out green and then gradually get red as you drew the line. So that was on its way. Anyway, going back to the very beginning, we were looking for new display types, and one day John Ross, Jerry, and a couple of other guys came back from a Army surplus store that they were always looking at good stuff, and brought a CRT, 1 inch in diameter, 12 inches long. Not good for a handheld, but the idea was it distracted us from LCD this and LCD that to a CRT. And so out of that came an effort to figure out how we could put something up. Vector was suggested as opposed to raster for a number of reasons. So we ended up going to a consulting firm that had oscilloscopes and specialized in stuff involving oscilloscopes. So on an oscilloscope, which is a vector tube, we ended up making shapes. Nobody on an oscilloscope ever cared about making shapes. We made circles and ramps and things like that. That was it. The next step was to get a 5-inch CRT, a regular raster scan tube, and convert it to vector scan, which Jerry was involved in, and John, I guess, too. And that became a little tabletop vector scan game system called Mini Arcade. And we sold that late 80, 81, to Kenner Toys in Cincinnati. And they were all excited about it. But they weren't doing much in video games. They finally gave it back to us. We went in Santa Monica. Ed Krakauer, who used to work with Mattel, and had a company called GCE. He loved it, but he said it's got to grow. So we made a 9-inch version. The diagonal measurement of the tube is 9 inches.
Well, we wanted it to be battery powered on 5-inch.
Oh, was it better?
We
Oh,
were
yeah,
hoping
yeah.
for that. That was the plan. That was the thought.
That's
It would be
right.
battery- Portable games.
Reminding me that the whole idea was a portable game with the keys there and about so big and battery powered. Yes.
But when it was 9 inches, no way.
So at the 9-inch screen, big discussion on how does the screen go, horizontal or vertical? What doesn't look like a television? That's it. That's the way it got there. So we then worked from September, started designing on the system and designing on the games, and we took the prototype systems and 12 games to see the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago in June. So it was about 9 months development of the basic unit and games. Incredible. Anything I do today looks like it's snail's pace by comparison. So then we...
You know, you might want to mention another thing about June.
Well, just for people not in the toy business, you had to have everything always finished by June in the toy business, because it had to go out for manufacturing. And the ROMs, you know, were these ROMs, not EPROMs, so that they had to be mass produced. So it was, even without the CES show, we would have had it been done by then anyway, just saying that.
Yeah, that's true. If you're doing ROMs, not EPROMs, but ROMs, it takes a couple of months to get them designed, make them, get them in stock. So your deadline for having things is right about June or July to have stuff for Christmas. And this ended up being introduced in early November, late October, and it actually did so well, proved itself in 82, Christmas of 82, that GCE sold themselves to Milton Bradley. Milton Bradley dumped a ton of money into it, and had it in Japan, in Europe, and a bunch of different places. And then the video game business in '83, just as they got it all prepared, video game business pretty well crashed. So by 1984, nothing was left, and the field was cleared for Nintendo to come in.
Did it work when you got to the trade show?
Yes, we did, for the trade show, we did 25 prototypes. And one of the great stories is my brother Ed worked there. The weekend before they shipped, he took all 25 home, plugged them into his living room, had a couple of fuses blow, but he had, for the Saturday and Sunday, he had them burning in. So we would know that they would really work. And I asked him if he was coming along, couldn't come along to this, to tell his stories. So then we went with the follow-on efforts once it was out there, got a lot of acclaim, and that's when we did the color Vectrex and several other iterations of things we could do. And as you know, it was black and white, so we put a color screen on it. And all the photographs, it looked like color. So got it there, but the key was to get something that would actually go in color, and that's as close as we got. If you come up and look at it or go and see in the museum, it's got a burned out spot in the middle, because if 18,000 volts is green, 25,000 volts is red, 30,000 burns a hole.
Other than the delay, was it just not cost effective to bring out a color one?
Yeah, the problem is it was retailing, and they were trying to get it out for $150 or something like that. But the actual TV tube for a color TV was about $300 before you went and got anything else. That was, you know, you had the 3-dot pattern on the screen, and three different beams and everything. So that's what we did, and what I'd like to do is turn it over to Jerry for a little while to tell you his impressions and thoughts of what went on and the special secret that he's never revealed. And he got 10 minutes, that's all.
10? I thought I had 5. Oh.
We moved it a little.
All right, well, so the buzz, that just came up, actually. That's what it wasn't what I was going to talk about, but there was somebody standing, who was just standing here talking about the buzz. Yeah,
Rick.
Yeah, right. So it seemed like some people thought that buzz was part of the design, like some kind of interesting background noise or something for all the games. But no, it just came back from China that way, and the prototypes didn't buzz. Just wanted to mention that. Maybe that's already known by everybody. So then the other thing was about this this secret thing that Jerry refers to, because we were having lunch the other day, and he was talking about the voice cartridge, which was the Spike cartridge. And so the ability to do voice was built into this thing because we had a D-to-A converter, DAC, chip in the thing, which was used for video, and that was put in the ability to use the same DAC for audio. So you should have been able to do any kind of sounds you wanted. The only thing is that the CPU is busy all the time with the video, so you didn't have a whole lot of time, and you certainly didn't have a lot of memory. You know, toys later came out. A few years later, they had just handheld toys that came out that had hundreds of K of memory just for speech, and those were cheap toys. But at this time, those chips hadn't yet come out, so you had to do the speech with very little memory. So anyway, it was so obvious that this was built in because the D-to-A converter was there. All you have to do is sample it. You know, everybody knows about digital audio now. You just output to the DAC and you're going to get audio. You output at a regular rate. So then they asked me to do this Spike thing, and I start playing with it, and there's something wrong with the sound. It's like all tinny or something. There's not the way I'm expecting it to work. So I actually looked at the circuit board, and it was missing a capacitor that it should have had to hold, like a sample and hold capacitor. because those are used in, for circuit heads, they all know what that is. That holds your signal when you're not attending to it. So, the audio could be a series of steps that you just refresh every so often, and then this capacitor keeps it going. So, the funny thing was that that was a signal to remind me that I'm done, I guess.
You don't want to know.
All right, so anyway, so the thing was, I'm sitting there in this office, and like freaking out, like, because if it's missing the capacitor, it's going to be missing probably on all of them, but maybe not. So I opened up another one and looked at it, and the capacitor wasn't there. So not only wasn't it there was no sign of it. There were no holes in the board. It wasn't like they forgot to put it in. So then I eventually, after freaking out for a few hours, I looked at the original schematics, those are funny in themselves. How we drew things in pencil back then? I don't know when's the last time anybody used a pencil. And it was like you got into it, like, wow, this is really good straight line, and now I'm going up this way, and oh, let me erase the corner and make it perfect. Like that, somehow that mattered. I don't know if I have to ask some of these other people if that mattered to them back in those old days or not. Anyway, so it turns out, and this is the big secret thing that I didn't want to tell anybody because it was my fault. It turns out it wasn't on the schematic. So it was a disaster. And why wasn't it on the schematic? Probably never had the time to test that function. I would have sworn that I would have tested the audio function on the thing. I would have thought.
Maybe you erased it by accident.
That's what it is. Does anybody have any early copy of the schematic before it was Xerox, or not Xerox? What was it?
Correct,
What's that
you
blue-
curved lines.
Mimeograph. There were blueprints with that blue machine with the ammonia and everything, right? Where that thing was. So that's a big secret. So anyway, so you can still make sounds, but you had to spend more time on the sound than you wanted to, and you couldn't really have full-on gameplay. You could maybe if you were really into it, really smart, but everything's always under a deadline, and it's really the toy business more than. I'm sure there's video game deadlines too, but the toy business is really a deadline because of this ROM thing. There are no updates, no downloads, all that stuff. So that was pretty much all I was going to say. I could say one thing Jay said about we were reminiscing about this the other day over lunch, about he went to a consultant. I don't remember that step. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. But I totally don't remember that. I thought we were just talking about using a tube, and then we just started playing around with things. And the big challenge was, if you looked at an asteroids game in the back, which you couldn't really get access to, but if the guy was maintaining it in the arcade, you could take a little quick peek, you could see that there was this huge circuit board in there, full of large TTL chips. Not just 16-pin ones or something, all these big chips that probably turned out to be arithmetic logic unit chips and all kinds of fancy stuff. So there was no way that could go into a product. So that's what I remember, just trying to come up with a cheap circuit that would work, and that's what this thing ended up being. It had to be really cheap because you still had to pay for the tube and all this other stuff. And then we had a power transformer, which we originally weren't going to have. It was going to be, the consumer pays for the batteries, not included, and all that. And the whole thing just escalated in price. So, all right, I guess I'm done. Nice talking to you.
He left out the fact that the effort to make Spike talk, despite all that, was absolutely amazing. He got it in there, and you all know Spike when he says, "Spike, Molly." But I never really thought about it, but the game kind of stops when that happens. Remember, it's at the end of a little session, and the game kind of stops, or wave slows down. He made it work anyway, even though the missing capacitor. Chris, one of the things we want to do, come on up. one of the things we like to do is tell you these items about the early days of Vectrex, and now talk about the latest part of Vectrex. It's kept on, it's gotten better and better.
While he's getting set up, I'm gonna have to ask you a question.
Yeah, and then we're gonna go to some Q&A, so while he's doing that.
You keep mentioning about the toy business. Now, did you guys consider yourself video game designers or toy makers?
We were both. We did video games and toys. We got quite a number of toys out there. For a while, we did a lot of talking dolls and electronic things. We did a number of just mechanical toys. One of my favorites was an almost nothing toy. I've forgotten the name of it, but it was the idea of a racing tire. You want to hook up anything?
I might do that in a minute. Have just some talking points that I'd made.
Okay, you get this then in 2 minutes to answer the question about toys. And among the many, we probably have 50 or 100 toys that we've done. And one of the keys is if you're getting royalties on toys, you want to have a patent. Patent royalties are treated as capital gains. That works. So guess what? I've got 43 patents. But this toy was a racing tire, and that's what it was. It was a little tire, rubber tire. You put it on a handle, and you pulled out.
Oh, zip
Here.
racer type thing, yeah.
And the tire went racing off on its own. And we had a wonderful time with that, playing with that, and threatening people when they came in the front door with the tire running down the aisle. So we did a lot of that. So let me introduce Chris Romero.
Hi guys. So, for those of you involved in the Vectrex community, mostly known as Vectrexer, I run Vectrex.com, limited updates that it has, but I tend to stay involved in the Vectrex community just from an awareness point, if not a few other things that are in the background. But Jay had initially shown a video up on the screen showing what a big team, or really what a team effort that the Vectrex development or the Western technology development was in the beginning. And really that's carried over throughout the years, not just from the initial Vectrex team or the GCE, the Western technology team, and really on to Milton Bradley, who took the idea from the design team here in California to other teams in as far as I remember, in Florida as well, and then internationally marketing it out to not just the U.S. but to Europe, and then eventually over to Japan and Bandai. But all of this really speaks of a team effort of developing and supporting Vectrex over the years. And it is carried forward really into the modern development era as well. So in asking some of the people or the current developers about what's going on, this is something that I came across. So source code examples or graphics that are not necessarily part of the game, but are part of the game boxes, or even the shirt that I'm wearing, graphics that are contributed by different people, even sound that might be part of the game. All of this seems to be not just an individual effort, although there are some that really do it all, but also a team effort of a group of people to maintain not just the fan interest on it, but the new development interest. And going off to some of the, or discussing some of the original software and the new development. Originally there was 29, I think, I believe 29 release titles from the group, from the team of Western Technology and GCE, and then Milton Bradley as well. But that also included some other 9 unreleased titles, of which I was able to participate in releasing one of them recently, which was a mail plane light pen game. More of an educational title, really, than a game itself. But that's also expanded to follow on to over 120 new titles. And some of these notable titles, of course, have come from fans as well as people who've expanded into development later on. You've probably heard of some of these names I'm going to mention in a moment, but John Donzilla, he more or less restarted the modern era back in the 1990s of Vectrex development. So not just with Vector Vaders, which is a Space Invaders clone, but with other things that do, it just spans a really host of areas. So lots of vectors on the screen at once, with sometimes incorporating the fact that you had certain line draw limitations that we experienced in the original development, but he incorporated that into Patriots, which is a missile command clone. So when you get so many missiles coming down, or so many explosions on the screen at once, or some of the other actions going on in the game, he actually incorporated it in such a way that even though there's flicker on the screen, it looks great on the screen, just for gameplay and sound effects and everything else. From when we had time, and still when we had it, and we still have it today, a limited amount of processor time to work with, a limited amount of screen drawing time to work with. John's done a great deal of, or contributed a great deal of showing what the Vectrex can do. But he's also done some other things. So 64K bank switching, super large games and super large carts. 64K, and I think we were looking at, what size back then were you guys limited to for
Most
both?
games are 4K.
The built-in was 4.
The
Mine
Spike was 8K because we used 4K for the speech and 4K for the game, I think.
Yeah.
So you know all that stuff, right?
Yeah, I know as far as the limitations, but I know it's limited not only because of maybe technical aspects, but you had to get the game out in a reasonable cost as well.
Well, that's the killer. I mean, even the whole thing with the hardware too. I mean, this.
Do you want to mention the
So let me just say, I mean, I don't know.
6809? And
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to take over the thing, but I mean,
Oh, no,
it's
go
so, it really pains you. Who would have ever thought this thing would, anybody be interested in this thing now, right? But, I mean, maybe we would have been, saying, no, we need like another week, man. Just give us another week. It's important. They're going to be talking about this thing 40 years from now. But I mean, like, even, I don't know how long it was, a day later or a year later, I'm thinking, oh, we could have saved a clock cycle by doing it this way or that way, and all these clock cycles would add up. Why couldn't we put that in? Oh no. But then you'd have to change all the games if you made one change to the circuit, so you couldn't do that either, even if you thought of it. And what's the other? Oh, the 6809. That might be of interest. I don't know. So the prototype was made with the 6809 just because basically I was using that for lots of different prototypes, including the game watches that end up in 4-bit chips. So nobody ever thought that.
That's the
I didn't do all the game watch, but I did one for game time. What?
The 6809 was the microprocessor.
Yeah.
The 6809 was a microprocessor, and you were talking about the 6502?
Yeah. So, I was just gonna say, I mean, we always assumed that it would have a 6502 chip in it because that was cheaper and it was used in everything. It was in every arcade game. It was in the Apple. Was Apple out yet at that time? I mean, it was, right? Well, anyway. Not quite, really? Well, anyway, it was in a lot of stuff, right? A lot of these coin-op games used 6502 to good effect. Nobody was complaining about the 6502. But it seemed like for making prototypes of things, it was just easier to write code, or I thought it was, you don't have time to like work with 12 different chips, you know, you just sort of end up with one and it seems good. It had 16-bit registers that made it seem really cool and all this, whereas the 6502 only had 8-bit registers. But then when you really get into programming the 6502, you find out there's millions of tricks and interesting things that it can do that the 6809 can't do. You may not have known those tricks at the time. So it's just like, just one of the, or maybe a morning with no sleep leading up to it, you said, oh, it would be so great if we could have the 6809, obviously, but we know we're going to have to start working on the production game soon, and that's going to be 68502. So then I think it might have been crack hour at some meeting or something. It was, you know, you were supportive of that. Why not? You know, but I mean, the decision guy at that point, I guess, was crack hour. Get it? The quickest test program to write would be just put out some sound. You know, do square wave, sine wave. To like work with 12 different chips, you know, you just sort of end up with one and it seems good. It had 16-bit registers that made it seem really cool and all this, whereas the 6502 only had 8-bit registers. But then when you really get into programming the 6502, you find out there's millions of tricks and interesting things that it can do that the 6809 can't do. You may not have known those tricks at the time. So it was just like, just one of the, or maybe a morning with no sleep leading up to it, you said, oh, it would be so great if we could have the 6809, obviously, but we know we're going to have to start working on the production game soon, and that's going to be 68502. So then I think it might have been crack hour at some meeting or something. It was, you know, you were supportive of that. Why not? You know, but I mean, the decision guy at that point, I guess, was crack hour, I think. Is he the one that says 9 inches?
Oh, the 9-inch screen?
He's the guy, right?
Yeah, or Lee Chaden, one of them.
Or Lee Chaden, those guys. So all of a sudden, one of them said, they said, oh, well, just use a 6809 then. It's only, you know, what, 50 cents more? Big deal, let's do that. And so wow, we were like, wow, that's incredible. We get to use the 6809. And then we all had high-pitched voices then. Working too much. All right, so anyway, we'll never know. The point was that Jay, we were talking about this the other day, so he reminded me to say that we'll never know, you know, how it would have turned out with the 6502. Will we? We'll never know.
It turned out pretty good the way it went. So
You always put out a repo with the 6502 for us.
And new development with old hardware.
Okay, sure, let's do that.
Actually, the 6809, the choice, I mean, throwing it out on the table or not, and picking it up and running with it as the processor probably has contributed to things like easier bank switching, easier things to give the Vectrex more legs down the road. You know, tricks nonetheless with the 6502. It's a great processor and all that, but there are a few things that are advantageous with the 6809 that we've seen not only in the Vectrex but in the color computer and a few other platforms where it is used. So probably maybe a good choice in the beginning. Sorry. Now let's jumping back to some of the other community stuff. A moment ago, you were mentioning the limitations on speech. And if you happen to remember which capacitor that was missing. Oh, sorry.
Well,
If you happen to
it wasn't in there. It's like you would have only found it if you tested out the speech. I can't believe. I seem to remember writing sending a triangle wave or something just to test the audio thing out, but I don't know. Maybe he didn't, or maybe he wrote a test program that only was just putting sound out and not doing video, right? Because
you're going to get it anyway.
The quickest test program to write would be just put out some sound, you know, do square wave, sine wave, and see how, and make sure that works while not doing a game at the same time.
Do you happen to remember which capacitor it was, though?
Well, it's not there. It's gone. It never was there.
Oh, do you remember it from the design? Maybe we can we can put it back into the design today and.
Well, you can. It's just
a
on
user-supported modification.
Yeah, it's on the digital, on the DAC, when you have the analog switch selecting the DAC to go to the audio out.
Okay.
Throw a capacitor there.
We'll have to do more follow-up on that.
I didn't know it'd be possible to change something that was designed
in the 80s, early 80s.
Oh, people are still cracking their Vectrex open today and doing modifications. There's the
I think
no
I read
buzz
the
version
buzz.
of the Vectrex
Yeah.
at this point too as well.
You guys ought to sit together.
But sort of continuing along the line with the speech, there are other things that are happening in the Vectrex world today to sort of overcome the speech limitation, or have actually already happened. So the idea of coprocessors as to produce speech has already happened. Some of that.
But we brought the sound line out on the cartridge, I think. Is
Well,
that right?
there's a few lines on the cartridge, but what's done as far as sound co-processing is actually taking the second port of the Vectrex. Another gentleman named Alex Herbert, who has produced a well-known game called Protector, which is a Defender clone. Very smooth, very fun game, but he also has done support in the background with the community by making a more or less a serial communications protocol to go between the second joystick port of the Vectrex and an external sound chip. So instead of having to spin extra cycles inside on the 6809, the process has been offloaded into an external device at this point, or at least an option to do that.
So the sound came out on the joystick? That I didn't remember it. I haven't
Well, no, it
seen
didn't
this
come
manual
out on the
in years.
joystick port, but there's a bidirectional
There's
communication.
bi-directional.
So this, part of that is used with the 3D imager, but it was also
Yeah.
taken advantage of
Excellent.
to have a serial communications protocol across the second joystick port, and then
Nice.
use that to provide information to an external sound chip.
Really cool. Nice.
So, do we have any of our Vectrex game producers here with us?
Actually, we do have at least one Vectrex game producer in the form of Sean Kelly, who's done the Vectrex multi-cart, but has also made the menu there are other hardware producers. I mean, one of Rick Morgan and Dover recording this right now has produced his own dip switch multi-cart. I think there's probably maybe there's another person in the room I'm missing right now. Hold up your hand and stand up if you're a Vectrex developer of any sort at this point. But as far as software. But there are certainly plenty of them out there. Alex Herbert's, one of the people who developed software, but not only software for games, back-end support for development to help out other people. He also produced a serial, he also produced the driver plus the method to integrate a serial EEPROM chip, a flash PROM chip, so that one of the other games that you'll see today, which is Vector Pilot, which has the ability to store high scores.
Scores, great.
Store high scores, right?
That's incredible.
And he uses this in his own game as well to store high scores and to support other things such as secret passwords to advance to other levels. Those kinds of things. Let's see.
How many of the programmers have you been in contact with? Like most or?
Probably about 20 plus over the years in one form or the other. Either participating in beta programs that they're running or alpha programs that they're running, or providing back-end support, that is back-end support for reminders of what existed, or connecting people up with each other, that kind of thing.
You want to get Q&A, or do you have some more to?
Oh, just a couple more things. So some of the high points that have come along are circles inside of programs. So actual circles instead of just vectors, of course. Some of this
the
is
curve,
really
yeah.
massive
We
curve.
had the curve. We were playing around with curve
Yeah.
stuff. I don't. If you go into games, I don't know.
As well, there's a Magic 8-Ball game that's out there. There's a few other titles that are in the works right now.
Easy.
Very hard to do curves, though, it seemed like. Required a lot of processing power to do it.
Well, you could I had a test program with curves, but it wasn't a game. Oh, I'm supposed to remember the thing now. I don't even know what I'm supposed to say. I had a little test program with some curves. I think you could curve more one way than the other way because you could update the X more than the Y or vice versa, whichever one it was. So the curve could come around, but it may not, maybe making a complete circle was almost impossible or something, but you could make curvy lines. But I'm looking at you, Chris, because which games had curves in them, I don't know.
Well, actually, none of the games really had
The
the
original
original
games did.
title. None of the original titles really had curves in them.
Yeah,
But
it was tricky, but it could be done.
it's tricky, but it could be done. So those original titles, while none of the original titles have curves in them, there's a few follow-on titles, Magic 8 Ball, and a few of the others from Magic 8 Ball being a Christopher Tumber game, who gave you Spinorama and a few of the Vix, which was Kix Clone, Omega Chase, which is another classic title, probably most people in this room will remember, if not from the original game itself, but from recreations on modern platforms. He gave us curved lines there, but a few of the other developers are working on it as well. And to once again to sort of offload the processing from the 6809 for curved lines, people are creating actual carts that go into the side of the Vectrex that have co-processing functions in there, sort of to let the Vectrex do is the best that it can do to display things,
Yeah,
display vectors.
use the
and-
Vectrex itself just for display.
Right.
No calculator or anything.
and trying to do harder math or increase the capability of the Vectrex even more today. So that's other things other people are working on right now. But there's other cool things that I thought had come out since the original development. There have been basic and logo carts, so programming language carts that have come out. Alex Nicholson, who some of you might know as Vector Zoa, had a couple of nice games out. Star Sling, which is a quantum clone where you're trying, not really a quantum clone, but it's sort of a feel of quantum, had replicated that into the Vectrex. He'd also done Spike Circus, which is sort of a little balancing game where you're a clown who's juggling items, balancing on a tight wire, but all of the math that he's using inside the game to replicate the physics, he tried to do as accurately as possible. So I'll have that out in the console area for you guys to play later on. If you just drop by over there, you'll be able to play a few different games. And also Joust, which is a pretty cool program. Unfortunately, only one title or one cartridge exists, and it's over in the UK. But the developers are doing several things like this.
You can't just get the code and make cartridges out of it?
We could, but there's a gentleman's agreement sort of touching on copyright or author's rights that, and of course the purchaser's right as well to make it and to keep it just in the cart form.
No ROM or anything for it?
Well, there's a ROM. I know the owner right now, Mayhem, is, usually has backed up his games, but he's very honest about not passing them out to others for
Boo.
well,
Come on,
author's
Josh,
rights.
it's one of the best games on that system. Come on.
Actually, the Boo really touches on another subject that's come up on the Vector Gaming forum, Vector Gaming forums recently, talking about author's rights or copyright, or at least the ability to have the original cart remain in cart form. So one of the authors out there has had a concern that he wanted it to be for the people who are really enthusiastic about it to stay in cart form and to continue along in that format. But there's been so much interest in his original titles that it's actually come full circle, eventually come full circle now that he's going to try to make another production run with carts so that everybody can play the game. Hopefully in the future, other titles like Joust and other lesser distributed titles will also make it back out in public to play again. All we can do is, just voice our concerns online, and maybe this will happen.
I'll email them, tell them, shut up and take my money.
That might work. A couple of other interesting titles that are out right now. George Polanos, Fury Inc., if you've seen him online, had the first 3D imager release in a long time. So 3D Sector X. He's also done something that has now become a theme across the board with the release of Warrior that has an overlay. Same thing for Christoph Tutz with his release of his titles. He's come down, these things have come around full circle, not just ROM releases, but all the way around to include the package, the box, the overlay, and really the complete product again. So thanks to Jay and his ability to allow the developers to use the platform and develop new titles and do it at a cost that is not going to keep other things down like, well, I won't mention any of the other platforms, but Jay has been really nice in having the rights out there for us to use the platform and to distribute the games, at fair value there. I think that's about it. I'm going to show a demo of a new title maybe in a few minutes, but I'd like to pass it back to the floor for any other Q&A for people who have questions for anyone up here. Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, the design of the case, most people that see a Vectrex for the first time say it looks like an original Mac, but obviously that was first. How much input did you have on the design and the things like the controller being able to fit perfectly in underneath, the handle underneath, the black casing, which was cool at the time because, electronics were mostly wood grain back then. They were starting to switch over to black styling. I mean, it looks cool even today. I mean, did you guys have a lot of input on that, or what was the process?
That was our design. We had quite a staff that you saw there. There was quite a staff particularly when we got to the rubber band fighting going on, and so we had industrial designers and model makers. So we went through several designs on that, but the basic thought was have the tube vertical. So it wouldn't look like a TV. We then designed it to put the controller in. Big discussion on where does the joystick go, on the right or the left, and how many buttons. You would never guess how the joystick decided to be on the left.
And that's standard now. I mean, that was Atari joysticks, it was right-handed, but then when Nintendo came around, they went to the left hand, but you guys were for Nintendo with the left-hand joystick.
And we looked at how do pilots fly the new jets at the time. And the control for flying the jet was on the left, and the control for the throttle was on the right.
Huh.
And finally they said, well, if they're going to depend on them flying jets that way, we can do it here. So we did that, and we really put in a lot of effort to make it an analog joystick, as opposed to just switching. Most games that I've seen use it just as a switch. Are there some that use
most of the games use it as a switch, but there's more than a handful of titles, modern titles, that are using the analog joystick as an actual control. And in fact, many of even going back to John's original games, when we're talking about the analog control of the joystick, which I really thought is interesting that it was incorporated as analog instead of digital, and certainly more expensive to be incorporated as an analog joystick. And last night when I was photocopying some of the original schematics, the D-size drawings, or scanning, not photocopying, scanning. We'll see those after the show too. I'll make those available online, so Kinko's copying that. But as far as the analog joystick goes, I've seen more than a few titles use the analog joystick to good effect. I've seen more than a few aftermarket accessories that are actually using the analog joystick, or even if they're a replacement for the joystick, that are using the analog control of it to good effect in the game. So some of those are Omega Chase. So if you remember the original game, you could turn the car in just about any direction. That has been adapted, even after being written, that's been adapted for the analog control.
So,
We save some cost on the analog because we have that D-to-A converter that other, like an Atari or something, didn't have a D-to-A converter in it, so we were able to read the joystick. So the only real cost was the dual pot thing itself, which is, yes, it's very expensive compared with buttons, but at least we had the ability to read it anyway.
Now, it started with Atari and, Intellivision and Coleco followed, but is there any plans to do like a Vectrex Lives? Like a re-release, like what Atari and Intellivision have done?
A re-release of Vectrex?
Yes.
Not by us.
Like this, it sounds like.
So,
I don't
so well,
Chris will do it.
that is a very good question. Now, would you have any objection of let's say having someone out there like Jerry Ellsworth has done the joystick version of the Commodore 64, but having someone else take that up as a project, either doing a full Galvo sort of laser projection kind of release of the Vectrex, or even down into a mini packaged version you could connect to your average TV. Or
oh, love it. I think that would be great. There was along the way, and I think it was for Vectrex, I mostly forgotten whether it was trying to do a Vectrex or a Microvision follow-on. There was a guy in England that ended up making a small TV that had a teeny little CRT in it that went sideways. The tube went this way, and at the end it twisted up to a flat screen, so the electron beam went out and up to the screen. And he actually made a handheld TV of that, and we got that, put it together, made it into a game, but couldn't get really any interest to get it there, at least at the time. But that would be a fantastic thing. Love it.
Thank you so much, sir.
So, did you have some other things you wanted to show?
at this point, I'm not sure how
Got to turn down the
much you
lights.
can see it, but there is if we can get the lights down for a moment, there is actually a couple of new titles that have been authorized by the developers to demonstrate. Hopefully, they'll demonstrate well here out on this emulator that I'm using. Frank has produced the Para JDE and the Para JVD emulators for use. These are Java emulators, if you haven't seen them already. One of them, the Para JDE, is basically for use by the average Joe to play the games. The JVD is used by the developers to develop new applications. But Chris Malcolm, a gentleman in the UK, has made this game called Death Chase. It might seem familiar because, well, it's just a Death Race clone. And let's see if I can get some volume on this one too.
So that's a flicker as part of the emulation, of course.
Oh yeah,
Has to.
Flicker.
They've got to have it.
So and other parts of it. Put the volume up on it as well. Okay, hold on. Pardon me for a moment. Let me pass this back to the floor. I'm going to test this out. Make sure I can get it running with sound.
Tease, that looks so interesting.
So do we have any other questions in the meantime? Yes?
I saw in the video we saw a guy in the back. He's at Star Castle. I guess it makes sense that the Vectrex would be mostly porting Cinematronics games because both Vector. Was that something that helped spur the design of it? Is that something you want to do? Is try to you think maybe it was a good market to port those Cinematronics games?
The question was about Cinematronics. Was that a big influence on us and an advantage? And the answer is absolutely yes. Everybody liked what they saw with Cinematronics. We got permission to do a number of the games, and they were on there. And that one of the things that I remember about what we did in development is the Cinematronics had a great big circuit board and a whole lot of things going on in there. And by the time Jerry got done with what we have, we had this nice little circuit board that fit in the shape that we had there. So yes, Cinematronics was a great spur to the stuff that we did. Any other? Yes?
I don't know how plugged in you are to the newer stuff that's been developed, but I was wondering what you guys' thoughts were on the quality of some of the games being developed today compared to what you guys developed back in the 80s.
I'm just dazzled at the interest that people have in doing that. I think the stuff today is great, and I'm honestly not as familiar with it. So I actually would look at some of the guys who are doing it today to comment on that. Jerry and I and all the people who were involved in the original development are just speechless at the interest that it's created and the wonderful things people are doing. That so much of it doesn't show up. It just, bingo, it's there, and then the games are there. And there's a tremendous amount of work going on to make them as good as they are. So.
At the time, when you guys were working on all this stuff, did you ever even consider that 40 years later, you'd still be talking about it?
Never, never at all. We were totally devoted to that. That took over the company for at least a year. We did produce a number of other toys, but for the game development, that was it. And we never gave it a thought that years from that time, especially now, it would be of great interest. And so we're very complimented by that. Any more? Are you ready?
I think hopefully I'll be ready at this point.
Actually, we're going to have to move out of here pretty soon, so we'll do this and then off we go. Oh, look at the box I see coming up the aisle. Yeah.
Well, hopefully I can get this game going for you in the next few seconds here. But it's a single-player game of Death Chase. It's a Death Race game itself. And it looks like the sound has, I apologize for this, but the sound has cut out on me. I'll have it out on the floor for people to play with. There's a multi-cart that you can use to.
Less talking, more murder.
All right, there we go. More murder.
Ah,
Whoa.
Still missing.
come on. Supposed to hit him. Yay! Oh, no, no.
All right.
What's the object of this game again?
Yay!
So, a controversial game when it came out. Of course, you're not supposed to run over people in real life. Or it's assumed you're not supposed to run over people.
It's the Vegas Strip.
I know, right?
But just an example of a new game. It is very fluid when as far as gameplay goes. Very easy to work with.
When is release date? How can you get it?
He'll release the game hopefully before the end of the year, and he's actually going to package this game with another developer who's developing a different title. There's at least 6 active developers who are from the modern era That is from the late 1990s on forward. Some of them have dropped out and come back in, but there's at least 6 active developers on the Vectrex right now. So there's definitely no lack of new games at this point.
Well, for the few developers who are in here, anyone want to take up the vein of trying to do GTA on the Vectrex? Please do.
Grand Theft Auto on the Vectrex?
Yes.
Good suggestion. I'll pass it along if nothing else.
Well, guys, our time is up. We got to go on. Urge you to go over and see what's out there on the floor with all the new stuff and the stuff that Chris has and Rick and all you guys. This has been great being here. What a pleasure. Thank you so much. Keep it up and we'll do it again. Maybe we'll talk on Microvision next year. I don't know. Anyway, wonderful. See you then. Bye-bye.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks for being here.